What's going on, guys? It's Danny from Slow Restoration, and today we have a 2014 Chevy Silverado 5.3 liter engine, and it's getting a kind of intermittent engine code. Right now we have the P0175 up. Hopefully you can see that. There you go. And it also can kick a P0172, but pretty much it's fuel trims rich bank 1 and 2, and there's actually a common problem, and what it ends up being, I'll show you a little bit more of the diagnostics involved, but it ends up being the high pressure fuel pump under the intake. Not a horrible job to do. You do have to pull the intake. Fortunately, they are on these LT series engines, a dry intake, no fuel, no antifreeze, but you do have to pull the intake to access that. Let's jump into the diagnostics. You get a check engine light on and you check it and you're having these codes. Very good possibility it's the high pressure fuel pump. Could be your mass airflow sensor, but there is ways of checking that. So if you unplug it and it doesn't solve your issues pretty much instantly, then it's probably not a mass airflow sensor. It's going to be the high pressure fuel pump. Pretty much what happens inside is the high pressure fuel pump sits in the valley of the engine, which we'll see in a second, but it sits in the valley and it has an internal leak, so it's actually misting fuel spray into the engine. The PCV system is actually sucking those vapors in and burning them through the engine like it's supposed to, but there's not supposed to be fuel in that system, which is causing the fuel injection system to think it's running too rich, which technically it is, but it's trying to pull fuel out, and it gets to a point to where it's pulling more out than it should be, and it gives you that engine light. I don't have it running right now, but we will in a second. You need a scanner. This is a cheap handheld scanner, nothing special, but it does have the ability to show you a powertrain live data, and that's what you need. So right now we have we can see our short-term fuel trim bank 1, bank 2, and then we have long-term. So ST is the short-term, LT is long-term, and we have bank 1 and bank 2, and we can see these values. So we just started up and you can see we're in negatives across the board. This isn't terrible yet. Like I said, I had cleared the engine code and it hasn't reset it yet, but it will. And we're actually not even to running temperature yet, but you can see by these negative numbers we got something going on here. So back under the hood. So we're under the hood here, and pretty much what we're going to do to diagnose this is unhook the PCV system. So right here is your main line. It goes into intake right there. You see that nipple there, right here, and we unhook that. It's got a button at the bottom. You push that and pull that off, and we're going to plug both ends. So we'll plug this end so it's not sucking in unfiltered air through the intake system, and we'll cap this side because if not, it'll be a big vacuum leak. And then we're just going to let it run, finish warming up, and then we'll see our fuel trims in a second here. You can pull these off and plug obviously both ends of those two, but really no need to for our purpose here, just to show you how to roughly diagnose this. Up the temperature now, we did hit 160. It's staying pretty consistent between just slight negatives and slight positives, bouncing back and forth from 0. Let's hook that system, PCV system, back up and see how that changes. All right, so we'll pull our caps out of these, pull it off that one, and slip this line back onto that nipple onto the intake manifold itself, which hooks the PCV system back up, and then we'll fire it back up. But immediately you can see the short terms are in negatives, while before it was bouncing negative to slightly positive. Now we're 14-15% negatives. There was a 16 point something. Drastic difference. So it's a drastic difference immediately after hooking that PCV system back up. So we have fuel vapors in the crankcase, which are being sucked through, which is making our rich condition. So that's diagnostics on this problem in a nutshell. Obviously there's more in-depth stuff you can do, but we already did that. I'm just kind of giving you an overview of how to diagnose it with a simple scan tool with live data. But this is a fairly common issue on the direct injected 5.3s and 6.2s, even some 4.3 liters. So let's jump into it. We need to pull that intake off. So obviously anytime you're going to do something like this, you should disconnect your battery. And we're going to go ahead and remove the air intake system here, get access to the front of the intake manifold. It's pretty simple. We have a clamp here, we have a clamp here at the mass airflow sensor in the air box. Again, these, you push at the bottom of them and then you just wiggle them, pull them off. They slip back off, one on that side, one on this side. I already had that one popped loose. And 2 clamps will pull this whole air intake system out, and then we can actually see something in there. With that loose, we'll go ahead and pull that out of the way. Like I said, now you can actually see right down in there. Next comes the process of actually unplugging a bunch of this electrical stuff. We have a map sensor up here, we have our Evap here, we have our throttle body. This harness runs right to our alternator, so we'll have to unplug that. Our harness clips into this cover all through, up and down on the sides here. They're a little bit of a pain to get out. Get you a plastic pry tool and pop all these loose. With everything unhooked, we're gonna leave this cover on. Even though I unbolted it, it's a real pain. There's some clips on the back side, so you got to reach back behind this intake. I'll show you when it's off to get some of those clips off with the wiring harness. But for right now, we're gonna leave this cover on. There's 4 bolts per side. They're 10 millimeter. Down this side, and as you can see, now our intake is actually loose. So we'll take and make sure everything's out of our way. Go ahead and pull that up out of there. And once it's out, there's a, well, let's get it out of the truck first. With that intake off, that's how it looks. Now, let me show you real quick. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 clips that are behind the intake manifold on that cover, and they're kind of a pain to get to and unclip it. And if you don't get them, then it's really hard to pick the back of that intake up and slide it out. It's actually impossible. So you definitely have to get 1, 2, 3, and the small gray one over here is 4 clips out. Will make your life way easier if you can just get them pulled out, and then you can kind of lift up the top of the intake, slide your hand under, lift it up and slide it right out towards you, and just kind of set it to the side on the engine compartment, and then you can get down and set it down on the floor. And you can see the holes in this top cover here to get to the intake bolts, and there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 per side. I did misspeak when I said 4, but either way, I'll show you the bottom side of the intake. These gaskets are reusable. We do have new ones to go back on, not a big deal. We'll just throw them in. They just pop out of their spot here and you slip your new ones in. But these are O-rings, they are reusable. We're not talking about a ton of money on these vehicles at this point, so you can if you want. GM probably recommends doing it, but make sure you're all cleaned up, ready to go back on. Now back to the truck itself. Back under the hood here, we have some light debris. It's not too bad. We'll take a shop vac and suck all of this up before we go any further. You don't want any of that going into the engine. But once we get that done, this is just a sound deadening matte material, and that covers the whole valley, kind of cushions in between the intake manifold and the valley and all the injection system underneath. We'll get it cleaned up, we'll pull that off, and you'll be able to see the whole working. And this just gently lifts up right out of the way. Be careful you don't tug and pull. And now we're down in there. You can see right there is the piece we're changing. That's your high pressure fuel pump bolted to the back of the engine there, and it does have all the main fuel rails, your crossover pipes, and your injectors. This is a direct injected engine, So a little bit different than like an LS. Now we're right in here to the actual fuel pump, and we're gonna we do need to relieve the pressure off here. So grab you some rags, and we'll pop this retainer off. It just pops up and slips forward. We'll just kind of move that back to the side out of the way, and we'll take our line quick disconnect. Something like that, it's 3/8. We're gonna pop that on. Like I said, make sure you got some rags ready. We'll put down in there, and it's pretty much, you push the line in, you take and push your tool in towards you. We'll release the tabs, and then you pull back, and be careful because there will still be some pressure in there. This is the low side. This is going to be the high side on this end of it, but just be careful. Might not be a bad idea to wear some eye protection. That wasn't bad at all. I did end up removing this valve cover, coil cover right here. It just kind of pops off. You do have to remove this. That's the same hose that goes to the air cleaner assembly. I removed that. That popped off. That gives you access to this valve cover bolt here. It gives you a lot more room on this whole assembly here. And again, it just slips off. We can kind of just set that to the side. All right, I'm gonna set you up there, and you can watch me break these lines loose. They're not extremely tight. There we go. And there was actually no fuel pressure there, so I guess we let it sit long enough. A little dribble, but no real pressure. And same with this side. So with those two broke loose, we can back the nut off here. And like I said, loosen this one up. There's their fuel leaking a little bit more. That's all right. We're just gonna get rid of this line and get it out of our way. Remember which way it oriented. Drain the fuel out. We'll just set that there for now. Electrical connector on the back here. There should be a safety on it, and then you just squeeze it and it pops loose. And with all that undone, electrical connector out of the way, we push this. There's a tab on the back side that slips off of the end of this fuel rail tab. Push it up out of the way just a little bit. This one we should be able to get on there, and it's a 13 millimeter. So back our bolts out. There's two of them. This fuel pump does ride on a cam lobe, so probably be a smart thing to spin the engine over so the fuel pump's not up on the lobe. So we might do that so it's all the way at the bottom of its travel, so we're not putting tension on one ear or the other as we're tightening it up. But you definitely want to tighten down evenly as you go back in. But let's go ahead and pull this fuel pump out. So I went ahead and removed the one bolt, just give more clearance, but it just kind of picks right up out of there. And we'll take it to the side and show you how all that looks. And there's the old one, there's the new one. Obviously compare the two, but there's not much you can do with it except for replace it, because these are very high tolerance and actually very high pressure. So it's got like a kind of a valve spring on the bottom of it, like a beehive spring, and a plunger, and that's what's operating the pumps. And there is a shield that bolts down onto the flange. So we got a new GM one. Time to drop it back down in, and then we'll go ahead and torque these two bolts down. We wiped all that clean, cleaned it up. It's ready to go. We have our new fuel pump here waiting. But before we do, we're gonna make sure that plunger in there, it's actually like a little roller lifter. It rides off a 3-lobe cam lobe, a 3-lobed lobe on your cam, on the back of the cam. So we have a ratchet on the crank up here, and we're actually gonna spin that, and you can actually put your finger down here on that lobe, and you want it all the way at the bottom of its travel. It won't compress the plunger in the fuel pump while you're tightening the mounting hardware down. And with that evenly tightened down, both bolts are snug. Fuel pump's now in position, and we're just going to go ahead and torque them to 18 foot-pounds. I'm going to hit you here. So let me try this side. Here's that one. There's that one. So 18 foot-pounds, we're good to go, and we'll move on to our high pressure fuel line that connects. GM does recommend replacing this, so a lot of you probably won't, but it is recommend you put a new one on there. So let's grab our new one. With that in place, we can go ahead and tighten these back up. I don't think there's a torque spec, but you definitely want to snug them up nice. I like to kind of start them both sides and then go back and snug them up to your liking. But definitely, you know, you took them off so you knew how tight they were coming loose. Kind of put them back the same way. So once we get those tightened up, we'll go ahead and plug our connector back in and make sure you hear that snap. And then all we have left before we put that valley cover on the intake is hook our fuel line back up, our low pressure line. We'll pull this back around. That goes on there. Again, you'll hear that snap. We'll take and put our safety back on and clip that down. And don't forget over here on the valve cover, I think you can see that, yeah. Replace that bolt. We just took that out to give us more wiggle room there. We'll go ahead and replace that bolt, torque it down, and we're ready to put that mat back down on the valley cover. Almost. We'll make sure all of your wiring is back in place. So we moved this one, so we'll put it back over here and hook it back on the end of this fuel rail and snap it into place also. We got our valley cover, sound deadening material, whatever you want to call that, back in place. Take your time. There's a lot of spots where it needs to kind of nestle down in, and make sure it's nice and flat and where it should be. You don't want that holding up and pushing on anything, like holding the intake up out of the way or pushing on any wiring that shouldn't be. So with that being done, everything's now hooked back up. We're ready to drop our intake manifold back on as soon as we replace those intake gaskets. Again, you don't have to, but since we have them, we are. This is a pretty easy process too. Obviously, there's a tab at the bottom. You can kind of grab and pull that old gasket right up out. And the new ones come actually packaged individually. That's the way GM sells them, and they're pretty proud of them. But easy to install. You just kind of drop that in and work your way right around, with that tab being same place you pulled it out. We're good there. Get the rest of them done. We'll get that intake set back on the engine and start torquing it down. With that done, intake here ready to go back on. We're just gonna, it's really hard because it's dark in here and there's so many things in the way. I'll record it. If it doesn't come out good, I'm just gonna tell you real quick how to do it. It's pretty much take the intake. I'm gonna move that light so we have plenty of clearance. Slip it in, keep it up off as much as possible, and then you can put your hand under the center of the front to help that, and as you get it in there, then you can kind of lay it down and grab the throttle body and kind of place it in. Once you get the bolts lined up, you start tightening some up, and then we'll pick up back from there. Like I said, I'm gonna record it, but it's probably not gonna come out very well. There's kind of a lot of stuff in the way here. You gotta curl this harness back out of your way so it drops down correctly. There it goes. And this side isn't as bad, but roughly, hopefully you were able to catch that. Roughly that's it there. And then we'll go ahead and start tightening our bolts up, get them all started, get them all snugged, and then we'll start the torquing process. Now we're down to torquing this intake down. So right here is the torque spec. or the sequence. So first, you're going to do it in 2 passes. So you can pause it and print that or whatever. It's pretty much a crisscross pattern. You can see right here by my thumb is the front of the intake. That's the throttle body, and then you kind of work center and then out from there on either side, kind of evenly back and forth. So first pass is 44 inch-pound, not foot-pound, inch-pound, and the second pass is 89 inch-pound. And with that torqued, all we have to do is pop all these clips back into place. All of our wiring harness clips, we'll start right here and just kind of pop them right back into place. Make sure we have everything plugged in. It needs to be plugged in. Throttle body here, you'll hear it clip. If I can get it lined up, there we go. Clipped. Safety on. Some of them don't have safety. Here's the alternator plug. You hear it click. Another harness clip. Just go through and make sure everything's in place, nothing's out of whack. Try and get those back ones clipped back in. I already got this one on here. I still have to work on those 3 on the driver's side. And then a couple electrical connections up here. That one goes down there on the Evap, and this one goes up here. Click. This one, some of these are a pain to get off because the clip is in a position you just can't really see it. Click. Safety on. This is in the way. Where is, so we can go ahead and put our PCV system back on, or over on this side. We'll clip that back into the intake. Some of this is a lot easier to do with 2 hands, but we'll get it done. There we go. Click on there. Snap. These things go back in. Like I said, just make sure everything, go over the whole thing, make sure everything's in place where it should be. Nothing's rubbing, nothing's touching anything hot. And the last thing we have to do, I think, well, before we put our air intake system on, is here's our Evap, and it comes down around here and clips on right there. Looking good. With the air cleaner or air duct assembly back on, now we can go ahead and snap these back into place. You hear that click? Same way with this side. They're a little bit tight to get on. You can hear them click on. That's it, the key. We are going to cycle the key and make sure we have fuel up to the high pressure oil pump or high pressure fuel pump. By the way, in the process of doing this, we are going to do an oil change on this too, because the oil is contaminated with some degree of fuel, which is never a good thing. Clean oil, fresh clean oil is definitely good for your engine, so it's cheap. Just go ahead and do it while you're doing this. And even if you're not due for an oil change, like I said, it is contaminating the oil to some degree. Cycle our key, we hear the pump coming on. Do it a second time. We do have oil in. We did an oil change while we were doing all that other stuff. Fires up. Let the gauges sweep. We got oil pressure. It's running, sounds fine. Come out here, everything sounds normal. Just gonna let it run for a minute. I'll shut it off. I'm gonna check the oil level, look for any kind of leaks. Unfortunately, you can't see what we just did because it's under the intake manifold, but you would smell something. Or honestly, if it was leaking, it probably wouldn't run because that's a high pressure system. All right, and there you go. So we're gonna go ahead and run this, get it up temperature, maybe take it for a little ride, and we'll double check those fuel trims. But I Can't imagine there's a problem with that brand new fuel pump. The old one had some miles on it, so it is what it is. I'll let you know if there are any issues. So we took it for a ride. It's been running for a while. As you can see, the coolant temp sensor, or engine coolant temperature, is 185 degrees. And you can look at the trims. The long terms are really close to zero. The left bank is actually a little closer to zero, but it's actually more than acceptable right there. So I'm gonna call that fixed. Thanks for stopping by. Have a good day.